Bonjour à tous, je suis Sébastien.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sebastian Paramoni, head of the Schiller Institute's Africa office, in which capacity I had the opportunity to participate in the Russia-Africa Summit last week. It took place in the beautiful city of St. Petersburg, Russia, on July 27th and 28th. It was a historic summit, a symbol of the changing times that we're living in. For us, for the Schiller Institute, it was historic because we were the only Western organization invited to take part in the summit. Why? Because since its founding by Helmut Sepp-LaRouche in 1984, the Schiller Institute has fought for world peace, mutual development, and dialogue between civilizations in the spirit of Bandung and the non-aligned movement, to emancipate people from financial oligarchy, from imperialism, and from neocolonialism. I'd like to take this opportunity to issue a warning to our African friends, because for the last week I've seen a lot of analysis, a lot of experts making videos on the internet announcing the end of France-Afrique, denouncing neocolonialism, which they seem to have discovered last week. As we all know, France-Afrique is going to try to co-opt this movement for the emancipation of African peoples with its cohort of agents and experts because it knows that the death warrant for neocolonialism has already been signed and nothing can stop it. Let's just recall the Africa-France summit in Montpellier organized by Emmanuel Macron, which I also participated in, organized by his Presidential Council for Africa, where, in a magnificent communication session, African pseudo-intellectuals came to tell President Macron their so-called four truths about French policy in Africa. But they were, in fact, nothing more than servile lackeys of this neo-colonial institution. But Africans are no longer fooled, as we've seen over the last few days in Niger, after the Central African Republic, Mali, Burkina Faso, the very strong will of the people, and of young people in particular, to free themselves from the criminal policy that has been pursued by Western institutions since African independence, with the military and monetary agreements imposed on those countries, which are now freeing themselves from it. Let me remind you that all the countries of the CFA zone, this colonial currency, the 14 French-speaking countries of the CFA zone, they are all ranked among the 50 poorest countries in the world in the UN Human Development Index report published for the years 2021-2022. So the presence of the Schiller Institute at this conference is very important because it shows the world that Africa and Russia have friends in Europe, which is why we were invited. And that if France has a future outside neocolonialism, outside imperialism, it will be with us. Africans know this, and that's why we were invited to Mali in January 2021, between the two revolutions taking place in the country at the time, to demonstrate the union of the French and Malian peoples against the policies of the financial oligarchy. I say it here loud and clear. We no longer want military intervention by the West in general, and France in particular, on the African continent. Historic, then, for its importance in the global paradigm shift towards a multipolar, de-dollarized world based on mutual respect and development. As Vladimir Putin said at a press conference at the Russia-Africa Summit, and I quote, "The summit has again confirmed the firm resolve of both Russia and Africa to continue developing mutually beneficial partnership and seeking new forms and areas for cooperation." And this is what I was able to observe on site. Despite strong pressure from Western institutions on African leaders and governments not to attend the summit, the Russia-Africa Forum was attended by official delegations from 48 countries. 27 countries were represented by the head of state or prime minister, as well as by the continent's 5 largest integration associations. To name but the two most important such attendees, the African Union was represented by its current chairman, Azali Assoumani, president of the Union of the Comoros, and by Moussa Faki Mahamat, chairman of the African Union Commission, as well as 17 heads of state in person. This summit leads to a revolution in world affairs concerning the establishment of the multipolar world. First, a final declaration from the summit in which participants declared their commitment to build together a new, more just, multipolar architecture of world order based on the sovereign equality of states and mutually beneficial cooperation. A declaration on the prevention of an arms race in outer space. A declaration on cooperation to ensure international information security, because, as you know, the war on fake news is everywhere. A declaration on strengthening cooperation in the fight against terrorism. And finally, a Russia-Africa action plan for 2023 to 2026 to prepare for the full implementation of the agreements signed at the summit.
Comme l'a déclaré Anton Kobiakov.
As Anton Kobiakov, advisor to the Russian president and executive secretary of the Russia-Africa Events Organizing Committee, put it, there were over 9,000 participants, 1,000 representatives of Russian and African companies, official delegations from various countries, of course, but also civil society organizations. African companies were present in large numbers, with displays all over the convention center, showcasing their handicrafts and the manufacture of various African products, as well as Russian partners on site.
Donc, il y a eu 50...
A total of 59 roundtables were organized, with 457 speakers focusing on four main areas. The new global economy, which is the main topic. The second, cooperation in science and technology. The third, the humanitarian and social sphere, working together for a new quality of life. And the fourth was integrated security and the sovereign development of every nation in the world. And strangely enough, none of these speakers were from the West, except for the Schiller Institute. And there was also a journalist from France 24 whom I met. It's also worth noting the exceptional presence of Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil and now head of the New Development Bank, the BRICS Bank. During her discussion with Vladimir Putin, he recalled that it was in 2014 that he and Dilma Rousseff initiated the creation of this financial structure, and that the members of the BRICS, and I quote Vladimir Putin, are not here to ally themselves against anyone, but to work in the interests of everyone, and that this also applies to the financial sector. In other words, the de-dollarization of the global economy is underway. I was able to attend a large number of panels, each more fascinating than the last. I'll just mention a few of them here. In the first panel, with the presence of the president of Zimbabwe, Emerson Mnangagwa, who gave a very clear clarification. There was no embellishment. It was clear. It was precise. Denouncing the stranglehold of colonialism and imperialism, in his own words, he declared that there was a globalist order fighting against the global South, but that with the progressive nations like Russia and China, we will win. He denounced the West, which for the past 100 years has prevented us from achieving real independence, but has come to lecture us on democracy and finance puppet opposition groups. His words speak for themselves. Finally, he announced that Zimbabwe would be making a qualitative leap forward in all areas of its physical economy, with the implementation of the Science and Technology 2030 program. Furthermore, in an exchange with the Russian president, which was published during the summit, the Zimbabwean president declared that, in view of the sanctions imposed on our two countries, Russia and Zimbabwe, and the resulting difficulties in undertaking transactions denominated in US dollars, Zimbabwe agrees to seek autonomous alternative solutions and the use of other forms of payment for various transactions. I am pleased that the Russian Federation has already accomplished this thanks to, or despite, the sanctions imposed. We see de-dollarization again. In 2020, I wrote a book entitled Voir l'Afrique avec les yeux du futur, Seeing Africa with the Eyes of the Future. The first chapter is devoted to the monetary sovereignty of each African country. The second is on space, the development of space technologies in Africa, and the third on the development of civilian nuclear power in Africa, a subject that is considered taboo. But not taboo at the Russia-Africa Summit. The first panel could not have been clearer. The first panel of the summit, Atoms for Peace, which was a historic program. There is currently only one nuclear power plant in operation on the African continent, in South Africa. But a nuclear power plant is currently under construction with the Russian nuclear company Rosatom at Al-Daba in Egypt. And Rosatom has committed itself, and I quote what was repeated during the first panel, to the following: to supply Russian nuclear fuel for the entire life of the plant, staff training, a school has been set up in Egypt to train nuclear engineers to manage the plant themselves, and to support Egyptian partners in operating and maintaining the plant for the first 10 years. After that, through the transfer of knowledge and technology, they'll be able to run the nuclear plant themselves.
Donc un grand nombre
A large number of countries are interested in civil nuclear power. Ghana, Nigeria, Rwanda, Burundi, Uganda, which has announced that the first nuclear power plant should be connected to the grid by 2031, a very ambitious project, only 7 years' time. Burkina Faso has also officially shown its interest in nuclear power on Burkinabe territory.
sur le territoire burkinabé. Était présent
Present at this first panel was someone you might already know, Princey Mtambeni, founder of Africa for Nuclear, who had taken part in a Schiller Institute conference already in April 2022. She once again denounced the hypocrisy of Western policies on sustainable development and energy transition, which are opposed to the development of nuclear power in Africa. Of course, here in the West, we swear by low-intensity energies. In response, Ibrahim Uwizeye, the Minister of Hydraulics, Energy and Mining for the Republic of Burundi, went on to say that his country wants access to nuclear energy because it's a small territory with a small surface area, and solar energy takes up a lot of space and is therefore inefficient, as he said, for a country like his. We see how Lyndon LaRouche's ideas on energy flux density are now being publicly and consistently defended by ministers from certain African countries. At this first panel, as has already been stated, one of the strategic challenges facing every country in the world today is the implementation of technologies capable of ensuring energy security, of guaranteeing the sustainable development of various sectors of the economy, and strengthening the country's scientific and human capacities. In parallel, there was a second panel on space, which I wasn't able to attend as they were at the same time, but which advocated the same type of approach, of accelerating economic development and of improving people's standards of living. And of course, to train African youth to the highest technological level. A number of agreements were signed to this effect at the Russia-Africa Forum. And finally, I'd like to mention a very interesting panel on the Eurasian African Economic Union, entitled Horizons for Cooperation. It featured the exceptional participation of Sergei Glaziev, a longtime friend of the Schiller Institute, who did us the honor of granting us an interview, which you can find on the Institut Schiller website.
sur le site www.institutschiller.org pour en savoir.
In the interview, Glaziev developed what had been developed in this panel on partnership agreements beyond Russia. For example, the Eurasian Economic Union, which concerns several other countries, such as Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Armenia, and others. The expansion of this cooperation between these countries in Africa. We've already signed agreements with Egypt and Angola, and many other projects are in the pipeline. So we're seeing a huge expansion. And I'd like to thank him personally on behalf of the Schiller Institute for granting us this interview during the Russia-Africa Summit, because I know he was very busy. one of the highlights of the summit was the many cultural and sport initiatives put in place to establish a genuine dialogue between Russian and African youth. It was fascinating to see all the exchanges between the two countries, which everyone agreed still need to get to know and discover each other. Among other initiatives, the Friendship Games were announced, to be held in September 2024 in Moscow and Yekaterinburg, to bring people together through youth and friendship and to get to know each other. A youth program was also discussed at a roundtable with young Russian and African leaders on education, science, and technology, and a World Youth Festival to bring together the world's most progressive young people was announced for 2024 in Russia.
2024 et réunira les jeunes les plus progressistes, a-t-on dit, de la planète, qui a été donc annoncé pour 2024 en Russie.
So, there you have it. A huge number of scientific, technological, sporting, cultural, and intellectual exchanges that were absolutely fascinating, not to mention the many cultural events that took place on site. I'd like to mention just two. The third International Ballet Festival of the Inopraktika School, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, to introduce the Russian ballet tradition to an African audience. And an African Music Festival held on July 29th with a concert by African stars who came to introduce Russians to African music. So you can see all of this sharing, this ferment of cultural exchange. In conclusion, we were able to meet and discuss with a large number of political representatives, Pan-African activists, and civil society organizations. We were interviewed by numerous media outlets, including Sputnik Africa, Algerian media, Afrique Media, and many others, on which we were able to give the Schiller Institute's vision of this new dialogue, this concert of nations, far removed from the criminal neocolonial policies of NATO, the City of London, and Wall Street. And at no time, it must be said, was there any animosity towards us, despite the sanctions policies pursued by the West against Russia and Africa. This is borne out, for example, in the opening words of Nathalie Yam, who granted me an interview during the summit, and which you can read here to show you the state of mind that prevailed at the summit. Hello, Natalie. Very nice to meet you. We're both at the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg, and there's a bit of a paradox in our interview, because I'm French, and I know that you are not allowed in my country. So, can you tell us where this French animosity towards you comes from? Well, perhaps you should ask those who feel this animosity, because I don't feel any towards France. I feel resistance to French policy in Africa. As I said at the outset, it is very important for us to be present at this summit because the Schiller Institute has always fought for peace through mutual development and dialogue between civilizations. And that was the whole point of this second Russia-Africa summit. We support the popular revolutions currently underway in Africa because the future of Africa depends on it, as does France's honor in putting an end to neocolonialism. This is a historic moment. It's up to us to rise to the